the informed investor. Thanks to Century 21. Smarter, bolder, faster. Go to century21.com.au.
Yes, indeed. We've got Charles Tarbey with us on the line. He's on the road tonight in one of the nicest little regional seaside towns I know. G'day, Charles.
G'day, yes I am. I thought to myself, I'm driving down your end of your neck of the woods, down in the lawn, beautiful lawn today.
What a great part of the world that is. I mean, I rented a beach house there for about 4 or 5 years when my children were very young. It's a little bit of paradise, really. I mean, you get it's like a little sun trap. It faces north, and as all good real estate agents tell you on the Australian coastline, if you can get a peninsula facing north, you're in luck.
You are in luck. Unfortunately, I'm only here for a short period of time and back in the car up to Melbourne Airport in the morning.
So we're talking about places outside of the major capitals. You've been doing some numbers on Sydney-siders discovering that they can find some bargains for themselves in the Blue Mountains.
Yeah, I saw that article, Steve, courtesy of your man Thomas today, and I read with interest, especially the part where they're talking about properties maybe getting to, breaching 2 million. Well, I can tell you that there are properties that have breached 2 million in the Blue Mountains a long time ago. So it's especially up in the Leura area and certainly down in the lower part of the Blue Mountains, down Glenbrook area, the properties fetch 2 million readily in some of these areas now.
What sort of housing stock are we talking about?
Well, quite often you find, particularly when you're up in Leura, you've got lovely properties that sit on the edge of escarpment. So I remember auctioning one there myself many, many, many years ago, and the most impressive part about it, and the reason people bought it, was not so much the house, but where it sat, and you could sit down and you could look straight down and see right down Narrowneck, down through the mountains. You could, in some parts, you could see the Three Sisters, and these properties are sitting right on the edge of escarpments. You've also got quite a few historic properties up in that area. So the 2 million barrier has already been breached some time ago.
And, you're still within striking distance of Sydney, and I guess the only issues you've got up there is you've always got to be mindful of the fact that you are in a bushfire zone, and you've got that sort of issue.
Yes, you are. Look, there's something special about the Blue Mountains. There's something about the entire area, whether it's a home that you might buy for the price that you're talking about, your 5, 6 or 7s. And it's just quite special. But it's really interesting, Steve, if you go back to the history of the Blue Mountains, many, many, many years ago, the council rates weren't being paid by people who had land up there that you couldn't actually build on. It was one of those situations going back 3 or 4 decades. And so the council would pin the rate notices on trees, on properties, and they would label how much was owed in rates, and you could literally grab that rates notice, go in and pay the back rates, and the block of land was yours. Of course, you try and do that now in those areas. You're paying incredibly solid amounts for blocks of land that were being given away.
Yeah, it is a gorgeous part of the world. There's no doubt about that, and the view from that escarpment is just unbelievable. We had an unusual sale in Melbourne at the weekend. Now, I think Victoria is pretty unique with its beach boxes that are dotted along the coast. They start around the Brighton area and they extend down the peninsula through places like Mount Eliza, Mount Martha, and all the way down to of course, Portsea and Sorrento. One sold at the weekend. How much for?
$320,000, I think it was. $337
for a box to put your chairs in.
$337 was the eventual sale price, and I think there was another one sold prior to it at $320, and that is really quite crazy because you got no water, you got no power, and you don't.
And you can't live in it.
No. Although I suspect some people would try. But what I found interesting about it was when I read some of that information again, and I talked about the fact that you needed to be a resident, a Bayside resident, ratepayer, to purchase those Brighton shacks. And I thought to myself, well, what happens if you try to sell that or you move out of the area? But I'm not sure how they police that. But even further down the coast, as you would know, down at Portsea and Sorrento, the agents are saying that they sell for twice that price.
It's an extraordinary amount of money to pay just for that convenience of not having to lug your esky down to the beach.
Have you ever used one?
Well, I know friends have got some, and I have sat in front of it, but it's just like sitting on the beach. And I mean, it's convenient. You can keep a barbecue in there and a gas bottle, and you can cook your lunch and all of that sort of stuff. But you're right, they don't have any electricity as such, so you don't even have a fridge.
It's almost the same price, I think, as was paid for a garage in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and it was a garage sitting on one of the main roads. It had its own title. There was a home behind it, but I don't quite know how the garage got separated into its own title, but that garage itself sold for a few $100,000. But I guess you can get some use out of that, particularly in the eastern suburbs of Sydney.
Oh, yeah, that's going to become increasingly an attractive prospect, having a garage for sale, because people just can't find anywhere to park. How are the auctions on the weekend?
That too has been a very interesting change. Great to see the change come through, though, Steve. The clearance rates were 62.5%, with Melbourne actually having a reasonable run at it. Melbourne actually topped with 65.5% clearance rate, and they had 1,326 auctions. But what we have to remember is a year ago, Melbourne's clearance rate at exactly the same weekend was 78.1%. So it's quite a significant difference between last year to this year. And when you add to the fact that the stock levels climbed for the first week in a few weeks, they jumped by 3.28%. So there's 8.72% more stock on the market at the moment than there was this time last year. Lower clearance rates, more stock. That's a great indication that the first home buyers are starting to get the opportunity now to come into the marketplace.
So that's a clear change, isn't it, Charles, from where we were a year ago?
You talk around the traps, you're talking to the agents, and I think we've mentioned this before, the agents that came into the industry when there was a boom and thought, wow, this is really an interesting place to be. Why didn't I discover it before? Well, they're really finding out what real estate's all about. And it's not just listing a home for sale. It's just, there's so much more to it now. And when you're trying to put two parties together in a marketplace where there's no urgency, it requires an immense amount of skill in terms of negotiating and relationship building between agents and their sellers, and making sure that the buyers understand what the sellers' wants are and trying to get the buyer to meet those needs.
Charles Tarbey, Chairman of Century 21, always a pleasure. You enjoy lawn, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Steve.
Charles Tarbey.
The Informed Investor, thanks to Century 21. Smarter, bolder, faster. Go to century21.com.au.